We're going to get started with round two of our briefings from Captain Googe here, which are much more terminally focused for this session. So we're going to run till right about noon, leaving a few minutes for questions on the end. So I think most of you are here this morning, but for those of you that weren't, this is Captain Wes Googe. He's a 737 captain for U.S. Airways based out of Charlotte. He's a check airman and technical pilot with U.S. Airways. We also have Brian Townsend somewhere out here also, who's an Airbus captain with U.S. Air and technical pilot. But Wes has agreed to come today to give us a little taste of the briefings that he's been presenting out to our ATC facilities for about a year and a half. He's done eight centers and I think 5 TRACONs, right? Did LA Center last week, very positive feedback from our folks out at LA Center on briefings for the controllers. Since 9/11, we lost the FAM program. We've really lost a lot of that pilot-controller interaction out there at their ATC facilities, and so this is an effort to provide some of that interaction and some of the cockpit knowledge to the folks out there in the field who control the airplanes. And Wes has agreed to come and share that knowledge or that briefing with us here at headquarters today. So thank you all for coming. Without further ado, I'll introduce Captain Googe, who'll take it from here. Thanks, Wes. Thank you, Howard.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Glad you could be with us this morning. I want to thank Howard Callan again and Dennis Roberts, Airspace Support and Mission Services for the FAA for helping facilitate this meeting this morning. This is the other half of what I've been engaged in for about the last year and a half. This terminal program that you're going to see was first developed initially for Charlotte TRACON, then I moved it to Potomac, Boston Common TRACON, Phoenix Approach, and then Indianapolis Approach, because they were right next door to Indianapolis Center when I did the en route program, so it kind of did 2 things in the same week. So it's a little different than the one we showed the earlier period, so if you were here for that, you're going to see some things that have changed, but let's go ahead and get started and see what it's about. Some of you didn't see this little video, so I want you to see and test your own perception skills, see how good you are. Look up on the side if you have difficulty seeing the board.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Sorry, madam.
It's just a matter of observation.
You have to look here, I can't
The
turn
real
off.
question is, how observant were you?
Now I noticed you noticed all the 21 changes, right?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
So that's where we start. Start with flight planning. The video is designed to just give you a little bit of a perception about the fact that after 9/11, when we closed the doors to not allow controllers in because of the security threat, and that was everybody. I mean, we even locked our own fellow pilots out of other carriers out of the cockpit as well for 7 years. We lost that connection. We lost the ability for controllers to understand how we did business. And you know, that was a huge part of them having a really good way of managing aircraft in the NAS, because they knew to some degree where I was headed and what was going on. And when they issued a control instruction or a clearance, they knew what kind of workload I was involved with in the cockpit. So now with the new FTT program, and we're encouraging controllers to come back, ride with us, gain that knowledge back. You need to see that real world picture. So now instead of being in front of the camera, you're behind the camera. You see all of what's going on, much like the video, once you see it from the other side. So with that kind of our theme, we launched on this terminal program to talk to them about, first of all, let's talk about flight planning. How have we changed here at US Airways? Well, we put in, first of all the NRS waypoints that are in the NAS today, we load them all the boxes we have. Basically, with the upgrades we put from a hardware standpoint in all the airplanes, we now have big enough databases to warehouse all those NRS waypoints, as well as SID stars, every airport we fly into and out of, the air route or en route structure, published holding patterns, NDBs, all of it. It's all in there, which makes it easy for me because I don't have to create anything that a controller can name. This all came out of a program that was started back in prior to 2010, back in the middle part of the decade, called NRS implementation. We were a part of that. It came out of a program called the High Altitude Redesign, where the FAA worked with industry to develop these waypoints, because then the airlines could use them to be more efficient, because they could put points in space where there was no ground-based nav aid to support it. And that helps us to be able to get better wind routes, things we use across the country, which obviously for us as an operational helps to save money because it saves gas. And that by and far is the largest expense we have at our airline today is fuel. But I think you already know that. You look at it when you go to the pump and fill your car up. It's becoming greater and greater percentage of a person's family budget is fuel. So we use these routes. Here's a case study. We took an LAX to Charlotte trip. The blue line is the conventional routing that we used to file using ground-based nav aids, jet routes, Victor Airways, the low altitude, SID stars, the whole 9 yards. Now we put 2 NRS waypoints, one here in the middle part of the country in Oklahoma, another one back here near California, and you smooth that whole route out to almost a geometric or a great circle route to the eastern part of the country. That one little change saved 20 miles off that route for us on a daily basis. 20 miles, who cares? 20 miles in our business is huge because everybody's flying it. They're all using the same thing we're doing. All the airlines employ these NRS waypoints in their flight planning today, okay? Part of that is manifested when controllers work our aircraft because they will at times ask us if we want to take a shortcut. Most of our crews at US Airways now have been trained and understand about, well, I really don't want that because that's so far at the other end of the country. What it does is it actually takes away the benefit of the routing that dispatch has put in there to account for things like the short changes in mileage because we smooth the route out, or more importantly, wind routes, okay? With the wind being what it is in the NAS, especially when you get these big variations in the jet stream, you'll find that when you get a lot of this north-south action out of the jet stream, you can't just go straight across the country. You can arguably say, well, you'll fly fewer miles. That's true. But you're going to do it at such a slow ground speed at certain segments of the country as to spend more time in the air than if you had done much like sailors did. You point the nose out of the wind at certain key times. You may accept more miles flown, but you're going to do it at a higher ground speed. Therefore, you're going to spend less time in the air. And the time is the key factor. The longer the engine runs, the gas we're burning. So limit that as much as you can. The other thing with NRS waypoints that we found from flight planning, we can mimic what controllers are doing for us on a historical basis. This was a Las Vegas to San Francisco trip that we fly out of the Phoenix hub. And normally the flight plan took us up over between the MOAs up here in northeastern California, Nevada, and you'd make a left turn at Cold LVOR and head into San Francisco. Controllers generally between LA Center and Oakland Center would cut us a shortcut, as evidenced by these POET routes, which is similar to PDARs. And so the company goes, well, geez, if there was just a point in space, put a VOR out there. Well, we can't do that. You got building a VOR on the ground is an expensive proposition, but we can put a point in space out there using that NRS waypoint system and then use it in the filing procedure, which is what we did. Put the waypoint there, and now the airplane pretty much mimics what controllers are doing anyway. So in our world, we've cut some miles off this trip, about 25 miles off the flight. In his world, we just saved him a transmission. It's one less thing he has to do. So, plus we can now plan to carry less gas, which means we can carry more people, more freight, the things that we use to make money. Because irregardless of what you might think about the industry, our margins are thin. I'm not an economist, but I see what we do as far as profit and loss, and I see how we make our money. It's a tough business in aviation to make money. Consumers are very finicky, and trust me, they'll spin on a dime. If it's $3 difference between one ticket and the other, they'll go with a lower price, even over something as small as that. That's just the way people are. The internet is a big driver of that. So, that tells you a little bit about the NRS waypoint system. Currently, there's 1,600 of these fixes in the NAS. They're supposed to grow to 6,600. Let's talk about fleet accuracy to the fact of with the DME update with the IRSs we have on these airplanes. When the IRS is an inertial reference system which creates the navigation tool to let the airplane know where it is, okay? IRSs by definition have as its core a thing called a 3-ring laser gyro. It's a laser beam shot inside a triangular piece of prism glass. As that beam spins and hits a certain frequency, in essence becomes a spinning top. Gyroscope, right? Now the platform's stabilized. It has motion sensors laterally and vertically, 3 degrees of motion. And once the crew member puts in a lat long, it now knows where it is in the NAS. That's what drives all the instrumentation in the airplane. Artificial horizon, vertical gyro, in this case, the HSI, vertical gyros we don't really use anymore. Everything tends to go through some type of electronic box in the belly of the airplane, massages it, and sends the data to instrumentation in the cockpit and also to some of the systems that use it, like auto-flight system, auto-thrust system. So it has to go in an alternative form, digital or otherwise, to make these systems work. So therefore, the days of having just a standard anaerobic, bellows-driven instrument just don't exist for us anymore as a rule, okay? So, 0.2 of a nautical mile with the update for the Boeing. If you have GPS on the airplane, then it's 100 feet, 3 dimensions. That's how accurate the airplane will be to a known position at any point in time. That's good because that supports the RMP type procedures that we'll use and develop in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Let's talk a little bit about waypoint convention. From a terminals controller standpoint, they see more of these waypoints than the en route folks do. Because as a rule, you don't see flyover fixes at altitude, but you do in the low altitude stratum. Flyover's easy. You fly over the fix, and once you hit it, then the airplane can turn appropriately toward the next course. Flyby uses the concept that the box knows its ground speed and ground track and how much angle of bank the airplane can use to figure out when it needs to start the turn. The faster you go, the sooner you need to make the turn based on, let's say, 25 degrees of bank to make the turn, okay? We see this depicted on just a simple little graph here. This is a SID in Charlotte, and I just picked it, drew the lines to show you the depiction between flyover and flyby fix as far as the ground track. But now here's an anomaly that we discovered when we bought the Airbus program, or bought into the Airbus program over 10 years ago. It's primarily tasked or tied around the Honeywell flight management system. Which at this point, we don't operate these anymore, but there are quite a few operators that do have it. It's the first system was put on the airplane. We've learned that at or above 10,000 feet, with course changes greater than 40 degrees, the Airbus exhibits this thing which controllers refer to as the early turn issue, okay? And what it means is the Honeywell system integrates with the flight control computers in the bottom of the airplane. The flight control computers, because an Airbus is a fly-by-wire system, it tells it how many degrees of bank it can use to execute the turn to make this flyby maneuver. Well, Boeing tends to let the airplane have 25 degrees at all altitudes, irregardless. Now, it's obviously important below 10,000 feet to have that 25 degrees because you need that for approach work, standard rate turns, all of that. Well, Airbus decides above 10, they're going to do a thing called a passenger comfort turn, whereby we're going to limit how many degrees of bank the auto flight system will give the flight management computer to execute these turns. And once above 10, somewhere around the middle 20s, it's going to take this airplane down to about 5.5 to 7 degrees of bank. And that's all it's going to use. So when you see it on the radar scope, you look at the Boeing go around the particular fix, and then you watch the Airbus. See how much the lead is? Because at 7 degrees of bank, you got to lead earlier, otherwise you'd fly through the other course outbound from the fix. Okay? Crews don't have any way to fix this. This is an internal piece of the software that operates the navigation system. Much like Bill Gates' Windows 7. You can't change the operating system. That's his. You can change how other things interact with it, but not that. So we don't really have any way to remedy this without Airbus changing it. Now, Thales, which is a new manufacturer for Airbus in the last 3 or 4 years, is usually an install on new aircraft as they come from the factory. Thales doesn't do this. Thales operates more like what you see with the Boeing. And for controllers, the only suggestion or information I can offer is that at least in U.S. Airways world, all of our Airbus ships have finally moved to this Thales box. We made the conversion. Our new airplanes come with it anyway. The older Airbuses, we just pull the box out and put a new one in. Not a cheap proposition, because these boxes run about $160,000 a piece. So it's an investment on our part. Delta has also made that investment, and I understand that United's about halfway through that process. But there's still several carriers that are still with the Honeywell Legacy and Pegasus, which was the follow-on system in these airplanes. Spirit, JetBlue, USA 3000, Virgin America, your foreign carriers flying 340s and 330s in this country, they're flying a Honeywell system, and FedEx and UPS. So we talked about this in the last, one of the early terminal programs with Potomac, and I got home and 2 weeks later they sent me this little video that I'm going to share with you.
FedEx 1282 Heavy, proceed direct to Wants, trying the Terps departure.
Direct Wants, and then we'll resume the Terps departure, FedEx 1282 Heavy.
Okay, so this is a FedEx 300 coming off of Baltimore, Washington. He's in a right turn in a SID, standard instrument departure, called the Terps. He would go here to the Terps intersection, then to Wants. Then he'd make a left turn out to an intersection called Jimmy, headed toward Memphis, okay? Now, all the controller did was just cut him a shortcut from here to here, just send him direct to Wants, and then he'll make the left turn and go out to this intersection. What you can't see right now, but you will in a minute, is an Airbus off of Dulles. It's a United Airbus who will climb in a separate SID, properly spaced against this climbing traffic opposite direction. He's flying up toward JFK. The way the SIDs were constructed, there's proper spacing between the two airplanes as they climb against each other. That's provided you don't do anything out of the ordinary. And that, to that degree, we're going to see what this Airbus did and how it was a surprise to the controller.
And there's a United Airbus passing at 2 o'clock in
Let's back it up.
FedEx 1282 Heavy, turn.
Here we go. Okay, here's the Airbus United. And you'll start to see him. Here's the fix he was going to, the FedEx. We'll just watch it.
FedEx 1282 Heavy, turn right, heading of 310.
Right turn 310, FedEx 1282 Heavy.
And there's a United Airbus passing at 2 o'clock in, correction, 10 o'clock and 3 miles eastbound, leaving 15,000.
Yeah, FedEx 1282 Heavy, we got him in sight in the rain here, and we did get an RA.
FedEx 1282 Heavy, roger. You direct to Wants?
Yes, sir, we're direct Wants, but to make the turn to Jimmy, it's given us a lead turn so that we don't overshoot Jimmy.
FedEx 1282 Heavy, roger. You're about 8 miles. You started that turn about 10 miles from Wants there. Maintain 17,000, heading 310.
So he led that turn by 10 miles, and he was at 14,000 feet. That's a hefty lead. But that's what the airplane does. Most airplanes would come up here within about 2 miles of this fix and then make the turn and go that way. And that's the way the SID was. The two SIDs were built. That's what they factor is that it would be a standard rate turn using 25 degrees of bank. But the airplane, the way it's built, the way it interfaces with that flight management system, that's what it gives. Now, below 10,000 feet, it'll use 25 degrees of bank. But above 10, you never know exactly how much exactly it's going to use. So that's just an example. And from our perspective, it's what we're doing is we're giving the controllers an awareness. And that's all we can do, because we can't, like I said, we can't fix it. We have no way to change it. It's unique to Airbus. Okay. Let's talk about departures. First of all, here's a sample of the speeds that these airplanes will use in the climb as a rule. And these are book speeds that come out of our pilot operating handbooks, which are very similar to what the manufacturer provides us. And I show you also the turbulent air penetration speeds as a counter to that. Why? Because although turbulent air penetration speeds from a manufacturing standpoint are a structural speed, from a crew member standpoint, they're more of a passenger safety and flight attendant safety speed. Why? Well, you start getting a little bit of light chop, we're actually authorized to leave the seatbelt sign off. We can have people moving up when there's just a little bit of jostling in the cabin, not much. But you start getting in moderate chop, now you got to worry about people who are elderly or the flight attendants with these big heavy carts going up and down the aisles. You start throwing that kind of material up in the air and down, someone's going to get hurt. So when we start to get to these moderate chop situations, our crew members are going to start pulling that power back to this turbulent air penetration speed, because they realize how much that fuselage is going to start jumping around the back. Not that they're worried about the wings coming off. They just want to make sure the passengers are safe. Because even though we leave a seatbelt sign on, if a person's got to go to the bathroom, they're going. You're not stopping them. It's just the way the world works. So that just gives you a range. The reason I put ranges of speed for these climbs is the FMC always determines what the best climb speed is. It's based on how heavy the airplane is, what the atmospheric conditions are. It figures out what that economical speed will be and then adjusts accordingly. And it can change on some other things as well. So let's talk about some unique performance issues. We operate 3 different fleet types at U.S. Airways. We have Boeing, Airbus, and Embraer. By and large, all these fleet types do a really good job of climbing as predicted. But what we've learned over the last 10 years with the Airbus fleet is we've got one that kind of sticks out as a poor performer. It's like a sore thumb. And this is the Airbus 321. Okay? Now, understanding the 319, the 320, and the 321 are a common type-rated airplane. They're all identical. The only difference in those airplanes is the length of the fuselage, how much fuel the tank will hold, and how many seats are in the back, and some door placement. Navigation, systems, generators, it's all the same. Gear, wheels, brakes, all of it. By design, because when you stock and store parts, one part covers 3 airframes. Great flexibility for us as an airline, because we take these airplanes and move them in and out of markets on a monthly basis, depending on seasonality of passenger movement. Beach is great during the fall and the winter and the spring, but during the summer, no one wants to go to the beach. They want to go to the mountains. So you can use these airplane types to satisfy markets so that as much as possible we leave the gate with every seat full. That's the game plan, okay? This airplane, though, because it shares that same wing and engine combination as its partners in the 19 and 20, given the fact that it is primarily tasked with east-west coast movement of people, when you load it up and you leave during the spring, summer, and early fall on hot days, it does not want to climb. It climbs very poorly to altitude, and it doesn't get up to the higher stratum, unlike the other aircraft, Boeing aircraft, the 320, 319 series, the 330 for that matter. So it kind of lags behind, and controllers have to make exceptions for it because it won't climb as well. It kind of sticks out, so you have to pull it out of the stream and let everybody else go by him. It's just a fact of doing business. We have to learn how to, and have learned how to manage this airplane because we don't have a choice. And the customers love this airplane. Foot wider in the diameter in the cabin, leather seats, Wi-Fi system, wonderful environmental system. So from their standpoint, it gets high raves. And you got to satisfy the customer. So we're going to continue to operate this airplane, obviously, and continue to buy more of them. The French, quite frankly, when they built this thing, they thought of it more as a high-density short-haul airplane, and we're making it do a high-density long-haul mission. It really wasn't ultimately designed for that. But we can make it work, and we will, because we need to. Let's talk about descents. Descent planning, you're going to get a view into how the box descends, even in the terminals world. First of all, crew members for years have used a basic formula for jet airplanes when it comes to descent planning, 3 for 1. For every 3 miles the aircraft moves forward in an idle thrust descent at a known fixed Mach number and or fixed speed, airplane's going to lose 1,000 feet. 3 for 1, that's what we use. That's how we plan our descents into airports back in the day when we didn't have FMCs. Well, works really well. We also use a speed adjustment. We know that once we pull the power back to idle thrust, we'll lose 10 knots for every mile we move forward. It's another little formula that we use. We coupled all that together to do our manually descent planning for years, but now we have a box that takes care of that for us, okay? The box holds in the database all the SIDS and stars for every airport we fly in and out of in the NAS. Now, there's some that we don't go to, obviously, Grand Forks, North Dakota, or other places. We don't house that because we don't need it. But any place that would be considered an online station or an offline alternate, all those things are in there, and accordingly, the SIDS and stars have all the parameters as far as constraints, altitude, and or speed coded in. So once we pull an arrival up, it's already there, we just fly it. Airplane knows what to do. In this case, I pulled in a a star into Charlotte, which comes in from the southwest, and the last fix is the Dena intersection at 12,000 feet, 250 knots, as you can see in the upper right-hand part of the screen, okay? The box is at 28,000 feet with the airplane, and at some point, based on its programming, when that top of descent number, 21, counts down to 0, the airplane's gonna, through the auto thrust and auto flight system, drive the thrust levers to idle. The nose is gonna pitch forward, it's gonna start down at a targeted speed, and it's gonna cross that fix at 250 knots and 12,000 feet. Most all speed reductions are done in the last 1,000 feet of altitude drop to the fix that defines it. That's when it plans to do it. We also know that the speed, the target speed, is based on a thing that Boeing gave us, and also Airbus has it as well, called Tactical Cost Index. It's a measure of the operating model, business model of the airplane from the airline's perspective, as opposed to the cost of a gallon of Jet A. So when you factor in hull cost, insurance, crew cost, all that stuff, that's a number. It's weighed against gallon of Jet A. And in our world, on the 737 today, in the U.S. Airways, our tactical cost index for that airplane is 45. That 45 generates those descent numbers, and those are the economy speeds for the airplane to descent. Can I change the speed? Sure. I can make it anything you want it to be. I can create any fix I need to create in an NAS based on a radial DME off a known fix, or I can do lat long, and I can put any constraint I want to it. I can put a at altitude, at or above, at or below, and I can put a speed on it manually, even though in many cases I don't have to because it's already populated in the particular procedure that I pulled up out of the database. So again, when the airplane hits 0, it's top of descent, it's right there, the airplane will start down, and it does it all automatically. So I get to sit there and watch it, be totally situationally aware, take into account what's going on around me as a crew member, deal with my briefings, because descents are always the busiest piece of the flight regime for any crew member. Briefing the arrival, briefing the approach, talk to the passengers, 18,000-foot transition for the altimeter, looking for traffic, weather issues, all these different things, okay? I also am able to modify the box from a precision standpoint by putting winds aloft in the descent. 30,000, 24,000, 18,000 feet if I have them, and also put in the altimeter change. So I can see, let the airplane see what that path needs to do to be altered to make it as exact as possible. And when I do that, I get a very good descent with this airplane, a very efficient descent. So when I do this, like I said, the airplane will descend in that 3-for-1 path. Now, I also have another provision that I've had for a long time in this box, which simply says, controllers don't always let you go to the natural top of descent for the airplane. At some point, they may need to start you down early because they have traffic coming across the front of you, and in their world, to manage the traffic, they need you to start you down early. So we employ a procedure or a provision of this box called the capture mode. Now, the new boxes that we use in the 737s today, a 10.7 variation, it's actually labeled DES now, descend now. And when you execute the button, the box starts to descent at 1,000 feet a minute until it captures the original idle thrust descent. And then it pulls the power back and finishes the descent at idle thrust. Which means I gave the controller what he needed, which was an early descent, but at the same time, I got to protect as much of an efficient descent that I really want as feasible. My descent issues, path descent versus cruise descent. Cruise descent is just a simplified way of the box to make small altitude changes at altitude coming across the country. In other words, cruise changes. It does it at 1,000 feet a minute. That's the only way it can do it. I can obviously do other things with the autopilot system if I need to make quicker descents or quicker climbs, that kind of thing. But as a real cruise descent, it's just to make small step downs, 1,000 feet a minute, and that's all it does. It's different than the path descent. We don't use cruise descent feature with stars, for example. We use this path descent feature. Flight crew workload distractions, MedLink. It's a provision we picked up about 6, 7, 8 years ago whereby we've offloaded the responsibility of people who are ill on the airplane away from us, who are obviously the novices. We're not doctors. Flight attendants are trained in CPR, and some of them are nurses, but we're nowhere near equipped to make life and death decisions about people. We just assume everything should be an emergency medical divert when in fact it may not be. So through AirInc and our operational control center via then a phone patch to Phoenix in this group, we let a doctor make that decision. Okay, he talks to the co-pilot who is relaying the information out of the back of the airplane from either a flight attendant and or a caregiver, and he decides whether it's serious or not serious. If it's serious, he goes, "What's underneath you?" "Well, Albuquerque." "Okay, can you get down there real quick and I'll make arrangements with the hospital and I'll provide transport." He'll do all the things that he can coordinate. Then we will execute on that plan once we know that's what we need to do. And by the way, if something doesn't work out right, then he's the guy with the liability insurance, not me. That's where it'll go. And that makes sense because he's the expert, not us. Now, the thing that I tell controllers is the piece that's missing for you is you don't understand when the discussion's going on. Because when we're engaged in that discussion with this doctor in MedLink, and I've listened to one, I'm on the radio once for another flight, it's a single pilot operation. Very similar to when a crew member leaves the cockpit above 24,000 feet and the other one has to don the oxygen mask. Controllers know that right away because they hear the muffled talk and they go, "Oh, gee, someone's gone back to the bathroom." Single pilot, put a bubble around him. Don't do a lot with him. Give him some extra room because it'd be very easy to overload one crew member by themselves. This is the part that I work on with our company about making it a ball note or a procedure or policy in the MedLink checklist that just simply says, tell air traffic you're working this discussion with MedLink. Therefore, I'm a single pilot ship. Just cut me a little extra slack. And that way we know we won't get in a jam if the guy gives us a bunch of control instructions real quick. The other one is the passenger disruption. We've been dealing with that obviously for years and years and years, but it takes on a new meaning now after 9/11. Why? Passenger disruptions in the past were about people just being people. You know, too much to drink, or their emotional problems, or they're despondent about something, or they're mad because the guy next to him paid $300 less for his ticket than he paid, so he thinks he wants a refund right there. I mean, we get all types. It runs the gamut. But now when you deal with a distraction, you got to think, is it just a distraction because this situation happened to the passenger, or is this contrived? Does he have any friends, or she? And while everybody's focused on what's going on in the back of the airplane with the big hubbub, what about the two guys that got up out of row 5 and row 4 and walked to the front of the airplane? What about them? What are they doing? You know, this is how we got down this path 10 years ago. So now when a distraction goes on the back of the airplane, personally, my hair kind of goes up because I'm thinking, okay, what else could be coming? I fly routinely with people who are federal flight deck officers, volunteered to be trained by the Air Marshal Surface. They carry a weapon in the cockpit because no one gets the airplane, pure and simple. Door comes open, you'll probably shoot first and ask questions later because that's what you have to do to defend the cockpit. They cannot get the airplane. So that's a paradigm shift for us in the last 10 years we didn't have to deal with. Now we do. So you can see how it would influence your just thought process and decision-making process. And you know, like everything else, Murphy's Law says all these things will always happen at a descent, the busiest time. That's when it's going to happen. So let's talk about the Airbus FMC descents. The hockey stick, as you see, as I call it, that's the top of descent point on the nav display. When the airplane crawls up to it, the crew member, whoever's flying, will reach up and take the altitude selector knob and he just pushes it in. And once he pushes it in, it begins the managed descent. Oh, note to self, if you don't push the button in, it doesn't start down. It'll just keep right on driving and driving and driving, whatever altitude it's at. So this is a workload issue. In the last 10 miles to the top of descent, you have to stay focused on making sure you don't fly past. It's a possible tripping point. Unlike the Boeing, which is an auto capture feature, at least if you forgot to hit something, if it's all set up properly, it'll start it on its own, and you just monitor it. So that can be a workload issue for the crew. Sometimes you see it manifested with some crew members on Airbus where you give them a crossing restriction 60, 70 miles out ahead and they just start down immediately, even though most people would have gone another 30 or 40 miles and then start down. It's just It's a way of dealing with that particular issue to make sure they don't miss the top of descent point. So it's a possible descent issue for him as well as the other two issues we talked about. Then you look at the Embraer 190, which is also applicable to 170, 175, or 195. He does all the same things that the Boeing does with the auto capture. The big difference for him in his world is that bottom half of that nav display, there's the vertical profile of the airplane. You can see it descend in real time and make the crossing restriction. I can't do that like this. I can't see that picture. I can build it in my head, but he can actually look at it. That's a huge win for him. Same thing, he sees the lateral track as well. So now he has a three-dimensional picture of what his airplane's doing in real time as it makes that crossing restriction. That's a lot of situational awareness. Good stuff. His descent issues, just like mine, the big one, different than mine, is icing. Because when he descends out of altitude and he pulls that power back to idle thrust, those engines are not physically big enough to generate enough bleed air heat to keep the face of the engine ice-free as it comes through those high-altitude cloud layers. So when you turn the engine anti-ice on, the power is going to spool up, put more heat out there, but it destroys your sink rate. So you have to accommodate that by pulling the speed brake to keep it consistent. So the controller seems a seamless descent, but if he was sitting in the cockpit with me, he'd see this guy pulling the speed brake, and when he turns the ice off, turning it, pushing it back down. It's just a workload issue, something he has to remember to do, okay? Let's talk about common fleet descent issues, headwind, tailwind, descent speed, speed reductions. Again, this goes back to the fact that that 3-for-1 profile that I just talked about earlier is that green line. That's how we plan our descent planning. The yellow line is a 3.5-to-1 line because I recognize with a high ground speed, I'm probably going to move 3.5 miles for every 1,000 feet I lose. Maybe 4, depending on how stiff the tailwind is. If I have a headwind, then it's going to be shaded back to 2.5 miles for every 1,000 foot of drop, maybe 2. So for me as a crew member, I've had to do a couple things that are a little different. I recognized after I left the world of the 727, the DC-9, all the older model generation airplanes, the noisy ones, that the manufacturers, when they built these efficient wings and put those wonderful winglets on, they took a lot of that drag stuff off the airplane. And as such, the speed brake devices, in some cases, the numbers of panels have been limited and the size has shrunk. Translation, they're just less effective. So if I use them, I have to use them sooner and for longer durations of time to accomplish the same thing. Because in the world of a headwind in a descent, I have to remember that as the headwind dissipates, the ground speed picks up, and that line, that red line, is going to start to fall back toward the green line, and I have to pull the airplane down to that new path, okay? And to do that, I use a speed brake. So I just have to be smarter about it, and we have. We've learned that lesson. You know, guys just had to figure out after they missed a few crossing restrictions what the issue was, and they just learned how to accommodate it. The big one for us will always be the speed reduction in the descent, because now you're changing the energy state of the airplane as it's descending and ascend. And again, that same issue with the speed brakes plays into this as well. Sooner for longer durations. The message I give to the controllers, both en route and terminal, is let me know as soon as you can about the speed reduction, because if you do it at the end of a descent, chances are I cannot accommodate your wishes. And I'll tell you, I give you the code word, speed or altitude, you pick it, your choice. But you can't have both. They all understand this now. So you plan appropriately. Now, as a sidebar conversation, I included in this briefing a little discussion about the OPD project in Phoenix that we're currently running 24/7. This was a collaborative effort between the FAA from the airspace folks, Albuquerque Center, controllers who worked in the area that would work the airplanes, Phoenix Approach, and us, the users, the guys driving the airplanes, along with the PBN office and other airspace support folks. 2 years in the building of a process which basically took an old star, all of them for that matter, I just picked one to show you, that had no vertical optimization, and now we did optimize it in the vertical. Lateral was pretty good to begin with. The way Boeings were flying this particular procedure was like this. Because it's an idle thrust descent, which we call a path or performance-based descent, many times the airplane would hit the altitude before it got to the constraint that defined it. So the airplane had to level off, and then when it hit the constraint, then it would start down again, kind of like a stair-step effect. Hugely inefficient for us as an operator. So the idea is change the procedure more like that green line, which is continual descent at idle thrust. That was the challenge. We also learned that the Airbus descends a different way. It's called a geometric profile descent, which means that it looks at each step down between fixes and calculates the exact vertical speed it needs to make that happen. and it will alter power in the descent to accommodate that. So if you sit in the back of the airplane, it sounds like a guy who just can't seem to find the sweet spot with the power. It's up, it's back, it's up, it's back. You know, my recollection was that uncle used to drive around with one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator, and you just get whiplash. You know, you couldn't make up, what are you gonna do? Accelerate, slow down, accelerate, slow down. Nowadays, when you ride in the back of an Airbus into Phoenix on this particular arrival, which is now called the Eagle 4, it's almost 15 to 20 minutes of idle thrust. That's it. No power variation at all. Passengers notice this. It's extremely, because they're used to that back and forth seesaw. Now all of a sudden it's just quiet. Huge change for a lot of good reasons. So the descend via that we're talking about optimized the star to give us flight idle or near flight idle as possible. We borrowed a book or a page out of the book that the Europeans have with CDA, continual descent arrival. Get rid of the level off segments, and let's try to put some seamless descent, much like this picture here. Least possible thrust, highest possible altitude. Why? Area of noise benefit, environmental benefit, fuel efficiency. So why are OPDs not much practice as we start this year and actually this decade? Well, because it's new. Compression were issues, phraseology, coordination, all these things had to be worked out between the controlling workforce, management, and the users. We all had our particular key or piece of the puzzle to fit in the picture. So we came out with a product that worked. And that's what we did. At the end of the day, we came up with this thing called the Eagle 4 arrival, which is, again, one of four. All the arrivals in the Phoenix are now optimized. They're all OPDs. Laterally, they're not much different, ending up at the terminal airspace there where the green line ends and splitting off into runway transitions, either landing east or landing west. But the real beauty of this work was in the vertical. At these fixes now, instead of having an altitude or an at or above or an at or below, we have a window of altitude. Tell the airplane, which you can tell it, be below this altitude and above this one, and anywhere in there you can be there, that's fine. We don't care, because we've already protected for it. And oh, by the way, we've put speeds on all these fixes as you descend because it locks everybody into the same game plan speed-wise to mitigate compression, all right? So the procedure now dictates what the airplane can do, and once you tell it, it just does it. And it goes back to that diagram we looked at earlier about the descent profiles. The bottom of the window, or the altitude, protects that high ground speed, 3.5 for one, at 3.5 miles per 1,000-foot drop. Also the short side arrival, landing same direction. As the airplane comes out of altitude and say the ground speed starts to slow up, it'll start to float up in the window, much like this green line. And if you have a headwind or you're going to the other side of the airport to land, then the top of the window protects for that. So what you've done is you've created a tube in airspace that's protected, and you tell the airplane, you'll ultimately be at a point, in this case, New Geno intersection at 250 knots and 10,000 feet. But from where you are at, say, 31, or in this case, 32,000 or 34, you're free to be anywhere within those windows. We don't care. That's your call. And controllers like it because once they're in this procedure, a lot of the control instructions are now gone because the airplane's already doing it. So when you check them in and out of sectors, you just check them in and you acknowledge where they are, the proper phraseology, and then you just watch them. And when it's time to, you say, okay, go to Albuquerque Center now, whatever the frequency is, see you, you're done. So now the transmission workloads come down. That makes them more attentive, gives them more situational awareness of what's going on with all the traffic they run. We've trained descend vias, the precursor to this OPD, which is how it's verbally given, with our crews for 2.5 years. We practice this in the sim. One of my compatriots in the room now, he's done it too. We've done this over and over again, using Potomac as an area of practice with the LD4 arrival. So we're pretty good at this. So this is the future. This is how NextGen is moving us in a direction toward better, cleaner skies, more fuel efficiency. So let's talk about en route holes, or terminal holes, I should say. We all honor protected airspace. Early notification with a hold helps me with fuel speed adjustments for max hold times. I do that by employing a process called linear holding. As soon as you tell me 30 miles ahead of you, you're going to hold at this fix, start setting up for it, I'm immediately starting to slow down. Because the sooner I get slowed up, the longer, obviously, it will take me to get to that fix, and that can be worked against the ESC the guy's going to give me. That means fewer trips in the holding pattern going nowhere. Excuse me. It's all about making sure that you don't you don't end up being in a position where you use the alternate unnecessarily. And what I mean by that is when we go to alternate airports, we have those for weather issues and because we have requirements to. But when you go to an alternate, especially late at night, and it's the last flight into a particular city pair, you know, you have logistical problems for passengers, the airplane. It's now someplace it wasn't supposed to be. You know, people just look at you like, I'm where? How are you going to get me to Philadelphia? Oh, well, there's this bus out there, and and they're like, I didn't sign up for this. This is not me. And then they get mad. And then because, of course, you're wearing the uniform, that's like the magnet. They all surround you like Custer got surrounded, and they start shooting. You know, and you can't get away from it. Because as we all know, everybody's got a cell phone, right? Who are they talking to? Mama or daddy? And they're saying, oh, it's beautiful here. The weather's just sky clear. Oh, it's that airline. They just did that to you on purpose. They're trying to keep you from getting there. And I'm like, you can't answer it sometimes. People don't understand what they don't understand. We could always blame it on air traffic, couldn't we? Yeah, we do that a lot as it is. So the reality is, but truthfully, we try to get to where we want to be. If people are late, that's okay. They're still where they want to be. They'll get over the other part real quick. Here's a sample out of the Airbus chart. Fuel consumption just shows you what we call the green dot speed. That is the optimized holding speed. It is a compromise between min drag and the min fuel speed. And it varies with every weight. That's why we constantly ask controllers, well, I need to hold at this speed today versus, you know, slower yesterday, because we're heavier or lighter, just depends. That's the most efficient speed, and the box has all that in it. It tells us what speed we should hold at. Vectoring. What is vectoring? Vectoring is a necessary tool that the controller has to get me to the runway. Okay? What I share with controllers is if you have unnecessary vectors, say you put me on a vector and you forget about me for 2 or 3 minutes, what penalty is it to me as a crew member? Well, an off-course 2-minute vector is an additional 28 gallons of Jet A burned, 560 pounds of CO2 from an environmental standpoint. But, you know, more realistically, it's the time. If I came from the West Coast to the East Coast and I'm getting a bunch of vectors and I'm already skinny on fuel, now all of a sudden you get the pucker factor. It's like, we need to really get on the ground here. I mean, you know, a lot of extra vectors I don't want. I just really kind of want to get pointed at the airport, get on the approach and land. The sooner I'm on the airport and at the gate, the happier I am. But that's the penalty for me. It just takes time off the table for me as a crew member. That's what it does. The approach phase, well, here's how we've changed our way of doing business as well. Through a series of incidents and accidents over the last 20 years, we've adopted how we bring these airplanes to the runway. The first thing that we want controllers to understand is there's some huge challenges for us as crew members when it comes to the different model types or fleet types we operate. We have fly-by-wire airplanes, and then we have conventional airplanes, cables that run to the control yoke that we fly the airplane with. These new airplanes like the Airbus and the Embraer, for example, but most notably the Airbus, there's more workload when it comes to runway changes on final aircraft maneuvering and descent planning. Why? Well, because we have to think of managed versus non-managed philosophy. Clue to the pilot, Earth the pilot, we don't fly Airbuses anymore. We manage them. You don't fly it because that's the way the French designed the airplane, and Boeing to some degree has designed the 777, the 787 the same way, and the 737NG will also be something very similar to it. Electronics are sending the signals to power control units out in the wing and the tail, and it tells how much to move the control surface. But there is no direct link to what the surface or the control surface or device I'm using in the cockpit. That part's gone. So when you fly an Airbus with this little joystick over here on the side, you're flying through 7 flight control computers to tell the airplane what to do. So it's like a desktop deal that you see at home. So the feedback is artificial, and it's different. And the software builds in protections for the airplane, because, you know, that was always, I thought, kind of the big joke. Airbus was designed through the software to protect itself from the pilot. Huh? Yeah. Because what if he wanted to do something weird, like pull the nose straight up or push it? Oh, we can't let that happen. And it won't. It has certain operating parameters that when you try to exceed them with the stick, it just says no, and it stops. That's different. So for an Airbus crew, when they depart at rotation at 100 feet, it's the autopilot on, and it stays on until on the approach at 50 feet, They turn it off and they land. So that's maybe a sum total of 40 seconds of stick time of really flying the airplane. The rest of the time, the computers do it, and you just manage the system. So that's different. It's not so easy as it shows up in parallel approaches in the terminal world, because if you have a guy on one runway and you want to swap him over to the other runway, in the Boeing world, we just turn the autopilot off, the co-pilot or captain reaches down and selects a new ILS frequency, and we just drive over and land. Easy. In the Airbus world, not so easy, because if he takes the automation off and starts driving this airplane over to the other runway, the poor co-pilot's got to sit down there and tell the box what the airplane's now doing and how it's getting over there. It's a keystroke entry workload issue. And he can be programming this box until literally they're almost in the flare for touchdown. Not the way we want to do business. We like people's heads up in the last 1,000 feet looking out for traffic and all this other good stuff. So that is a big fundamental difference. And it's posed itself from the standpoint that when controllers have asked Airbuses on final to make runway changes last minute, they just refuse it. They just say, I'd rather stick with what I got. And in some cases, if you say, no, you need to change, they go, okay, we're going around. Oh, really? Going around? Sure. Because now it gives me the time to reprogram the box, let it see the new runway in that part of the airport that it didn't see when I had it hooked up for the previous runway. It's got to see it in its electronic world. Otherwise, it causes problems for the crew. So that's a fundamental shift for us. We didn't have to do that years ago. So Airbus takes a little bit more work. And I've talked to people who said, you know, I took that last-minute runway change, and I go, how's it working for you? He says, I'm sorry I did it. I said, it was a real goat rope for me. And he said, I would not recommend it anymore. So controllers say, okay, well, then when can I give you a runway change? Okay, how about downwind? Base leg? Sure. That's enough time to do the adjustment in the box to accommodate. But once you get me hooked on final and I'm locked in, then I usually tend not to take those kind of changes. It just creates a workload. Oh, I see what the problem is. I have to, can we hold 1 second? I need to put a power source on this or I'm going to lose it real quick. Excuse me. I forgot to hook that up. Excuse a small interruption here real quick. I forgot about this, and do not want to lose this. There we go. All right. Man, that's pilots for you. They can just move on the fly. Real world. Okay, so here we go. So let's talk about planning techniques on the Boeing and the Airbus as well. This is how me and my compatriots plan our descents to the runway. 3 for 1 again, that same common theme we talked about. So I plan to arrive at the airport 30 miles out, 10,000 feet, 250 knots, landing same direction. Generally by the time I'm 10 miles from the runway threshold, I want to be at 3,000 feet above the ground and at 10 nautical miles, and slowing to 210 knots, or in the case of our 400 series airplanes, about 220, because of the issues and the constraints Boeing put on us after the rudder issue with the 7-3 fleet 10, 15 years ago, okay? Generally by 5 miles from the airport threshold, we want to be at 1,500 feet, have the gear down, and start configuring, finish configuring for the final flap setting prior to 1,000 feet above the field, and be on what we call a stabilized approach, which is very important in our world. This goes back to what we learned from accidents years ago, that if we tended to carry sink rates below 1,000 feet in huge speed excursions and or incomplete configurations of the airplane, we ran a huge risk of either landing short, landing long, having some type of accident. So the industry and U.S. Airways took a concerted effort to try to fix that. First of all, we start with the speed issue. We try to get our aircraft to fly the most efficient speeds in the terminal world, and we tell controllers if you can keep us at 220 knots or greater, then we're going to be a flaps up, which is an efficiency for us because we have least drag. And then if we have to configure to slower speeds, which they generally do for vectoring, then 170 knots works as a good speed because it tends to keep the gear up. And with the gear up, we tend to have the minimum fuel burn, because when you put the gear down and the flaps down and you're driving around out there at a level altitude, you're burning about 150% of your normal fuel burn. So again, we're being inefficient with the airplane. We tell controllers as a rule, visual approaches are the most flexible procedures for us because we have a lot of latitude with how we can fly the airplane. With an ILS approach, we're a little bit more constrained because we're on a predicted flight path, but we still have a lot of variability with speed that we can use and manage, okay, close to the runway. The one we have the most difficulty with, or the controller would, is non-precision approaches, because usually at that point, at the final approach fix, speed is now at the final approach speed and you can't change it. That's the way we're trained to fly the airplane. So therefore, if a controller in the terminal world is used to assigning a 170 speed, say, to 5 off the end of the runway, we can accommodate that in a visual approach and in most ILSs, but in a non-precision world, if the final approach fix is, say, 8 or 9 miles from the end of the runway, well, at that point, you're going to be slowed at your final approach speed. And he can't change that, because that's how we have been trained and how we execute these non-precision approaches, NDB, VORs. We also have this thing, which I think is a big thing for us in the industry, called stabilized approaches. This came out, again, of those accents we talked about. We learned, and ICAO did as well, that anytime we get below that 1,000 feet above the field barrier, we need to be in a stabilized approach configuration. Now, in instrument approaches, that means in landing configuration, gear down, flaps in the landing setting, a powered approach setting, sinking no more than 1,000 feet a minute and within certain speed parameters off of our reference speed, okay? Now, we did give our crew some latitude on VFR approaches or visual approaches, that if you don't have all the configuration done with the airplane to 1,000 feet, you might be 15 knots fast instead of saying 10 knots fast off your ref speed, or some other aspect, then we can go ahead and continue that approach even though it's slightly unstable by a verbalization of that instability, by saying unstable, but it's in this particular regime and we'll correct it. We can correct that by 500 feet above the ground. That's the latitude we've given our crews in a visual approach, with one exception. They can never, ever violate the 1,000 foot per minute vertical speed component. If they're coming through 1,000 feet with a greater than 1,000 feet a minute, they have to go around. They're not asked, it's a procedure, it's a policy. So therefore, you can see a perfectly good airplane come to the runway sitting in the tower cab, and all of a sudden he's just executing a go-around on his own. It's like, what's up with this? It's what we have to do. So with that, I brought in a recreation of a unstabilized approach into Philadelphia with one of our 330s airplanes. This was 3 or 4 years ago, trapped through FOQA data. And it shows you what happened when you come to the runway a little too fast, a little too quick. This is a 330. You'll see in a minute here, you'll get a cockpit depiction. He's lined up for a runway 9 right in Philadelphia. The gear's coming out. Now you see the in-cockpit view. Up in the corner here, you'll see vertical speed and airspeed. When I hit the first gate here, you're going to see a couple of parameters where they've kind of taken a snapshot. They'll come up as white triangles here in a minute. You'll see at this point the thrust levers are back at idle, the gear is down, and the flaps are in the full position, which means there's nothing else he can do as far as landing is concerned, okay? There's the first gate we're looking at. He says his approach speed is plus 30, so he's 30 knots faster than he needs to be. That's the first big clue. Usually we're at most 10 knots faster than our ref speed or approach speed, okay? He's only sinking 1,000 feet a minute, so from that perspective, he's doing all right. Then at 1,000 feet, he's still about plus 30. He's sinking right at 930 feet per minute. Everything's out and he has no power. This is a big airplane. Normally it takes off at about 530-some thousand pounds gross takeoff weight. So, you know, maybe 300-some thousand pounds. It's not an airplane that I fly, but it's a heavy when it lands. You got all that momentum coming down this flight path. Okay, so let's see what happens as he continues on. He's out of 1,000 feet. The co-pilot should have been saying unstable because he's unstable in power, but at least he was stable as far as the vertical speed, but then immediately he starts to pick up a sink rate. Now he's descending at 1,500 feet a minute, and he's only 700 feet above the ground. This is a bad sign for things that could portend of a bad outcome. So, as I said, 500 feet is the kind of make or break deal. If we're unstable at 500 feet, irregardless, we have to go around. At this target, he's 25 fast on his speed, and at 500 feet, the co-pilot's saying, you know, Captain, we're unstable, go around. And as he starts to hit the button, he hits the green line there. This is just where it happened in the particular FOQA data. He pushed the power up and he went around, and he came back for another landing, which is what we want him to do. We don't want anybody pressing an unstabilized approach to the runway. Because again, when you run the risk of bad outcomes, and when you look at something this heavy, I think you can kind of see what the potential is. So this is how we've changed as an industry. We've moved away from whatever it took to get the airplane on the ground. Now we have a procedure called a stabilized approach. It's in all our handbooks. Any airplane you fly for our company, you're going to do this stabilized approach procedure. That's the way you're trained and how you're measured and evaluated yearly when you come back for your recurrent training. Okay. Turbofan engines may have as much as 5 to 7 seconds of spool up time from idle thrust. Important to controllers because they clear airplanes onto the runway and you have simultaneous arrivals and departures from the same piece of pavement. And when a guy issues a clearance for takeoff, you kind of assume that once I utter the words within a second or two, this airplane's going to start moving and taking off. But if a crew member goes out there with the airplane on the runway and has those fan engines at idle thrust, it takes as much as 5 to 7 seconds for those engines to spool up to takeoff thrust for this airplane to move, which can kind of be unnerving, especially if you got traffic on a 3 or 2.5 mile final. But this all goes back to the same understanding, for example, like with a boat in a lake. If you're at a dead stop and you romp down the power, it stands up, throws a big rooster tail, but until it gets on the step, it doesn't really accelerate. That's how these fan engines operate. A core jet engine swinging that big fan inside that shroud. It's momentum. You have to build it up, and it just takes time. That's the same reason why we don't go unstabilized with the power to touchdown, because if a controller issued a go-around at 100 feet, which he's authorized to do, by the time we got those engines spooled up, we would be landing and then taking off again. So it creates its own issues. So that's why a lot of this work has been done on our end to try to make sure we bring airplanes to the threshold in the right airspeed, energy configuration, landing setting, and if we have to go around, we can make an immediate go around. And we do practice these as well every year again. Go around issues. When a go around, again, it's just like I talked about before, it's a time issue because when you start burning that much gas, and you can look at the different aircraft types, that's to make a low approach, go around, climb back to 5,000 feet, go back for a 15-mile final and come back in and land. We're going to go through that much fuel. Now it's a time issue. It's also a CO2 issue if you look at that. So with that, let's look at what a go-around looks like. Because from a controller's perspective, all they see is this airplane move. What they don't see is what goes on inside the cockpit. So my friends at United gave me this, so let's see what they went through.
67, just to confirm, you are clear to land runway 25. Southwest 867, roger, we copy that. Clear to land 25.
This was actually done in Denver in the simulator.
And United 15 Heavy, you are 2.5 miles in trail of a Southwest 737. You are clear to land runway 25. Winds are 080 at 6 knots.
Clear to land runway 25, United 15 Heavy.
Southwest 867, no delay, right turn off at Bravo 7, please. Southwest 867, I think we've blown a tire here, sir. We're going to be unable Bravo 7. In fact, I think we're going to be stuck on the runway. Looks like we'll be stopping straight ahead. United 15 Heavy, go around, sir, go around.
Okay, go around, flat.
United 15 Heavy, left turn heading 185, maintain 7,000 feet. United 15 Heavy.
Held down. United 15 Heavy, okay, stay again the altitude.
United 15 Heavy, immediate left turn heading 185. Maintain 7,000 feet.
Okay, heading 185 and 7,000. Watch your altitude. Watch your 7,000. And United 85.
United 15 Heavy, contact departure control 12845, please. 12845.
Okay, 128.45. United 15 Heavy. Speed 180, please. Speed 180.
Now, who does most of the work in this go-around? It's the guy in the left seat or the guy in the right seat? It's the guy in the right seat. Man, he's like, he needs about 6 arms. And he's trying to serve 2 masters. He serves the captain for configuration changes, but he also is listening to the controller. That's where we have to teach our crews, prioritize. You always aviate first, navigate second, and communicate last, which is because crew members are naturally wanting to talk to the controller and say, okay, we acknowledge the go around and the turn, the heading, and all, but you got to realize when the captain's asking for things, you've got to do that first. It shows you a snapshot into the workload in the cockpit. So it's pretty easy, pretty mundane, and all of a sudden you're moving stuff, climbing up, looking for traffic. If it's visual, listen to the clearance instructions from the controllers. It's a lot of work. Let's move on here. We got a few more to do. Higher crew task loading, fewer options, less operational efficiency. Okay, we talked about TCAS. Let's look at that real quick. Dimensional ownership, we own the vertical, the controller owns the lateral. TCAS is designed obviously to keep us separated. Traffic, avoidance, collision, or traffic alert, avoidance, collision system in the airplane. So there you've gotten a TA. Aircraft is 400 feet above us and descending, and it's now enunciated on the nav display. The arrow shows the aircraft descending at least 550 feet per minute, and now we've moved into the RA. The captain has disconnected the auto thrust and auto flight system and is flying the airplane to descend.
Climb now. Climb. Clear of conflict.
Okay, so we gained this a little bit. We told the threat to start down to trigger the RA. The crew members started down, and then we told the threat, the simulator world, match the sync rate. So now they're two pointed at each other, and that's when the TCAS system turned the airplane around and sent it the other way, which is designed to do it. It possesses 11 commands in the vertical to issue the crew members, visually and orally, okay? So as long as two Mode S transponders are talking, they deconflict each other. If the guy had done what he was supposed to do, the threat, which we didn't, then they would have missed by more than this, by more than 380, 400 feet. But that was just to demonstrate the fact that there's a lot of variability with the TCAS. It can do a lot of maneuvers. It's not just one way, always descent, always climb. It can do a lot of things to keep from getting hit. That's the beauty of the system and why we use it and like it. We can move against a Mode C transponder, although he won't move against us. We can see a transponder that doesn't have encoding altimeter, but there'll be no number with it. It's just a target. And of course, if he turns it off, we see nothing. So with the dimensional ownership, again, we own the vertical. In the lateral, the controller still owns that. When would you not move for a TCAS RA? Well, there's very few exceptions, but the one I can think of is in the event that if it's just you and another aircraft, and you see each other and you know you're talking to the same controller and there's nobody else in the sky, and the guy turns in front of you, that's positive identification. And in that case, Part 91, see and avoid, says you can turn and move around the airplane. But now if you can't see him, he's behind you, or you look later in the day and you see this depiction on the radar where you have all those multiple threats, then you really need to follow the RA, because you can't pick them up out of the sky. It's just not possible, okay? We deal with our hear-back, read-back issues at the airline because we realize that this is still the biggest threat for us. Full call sign readbacks and exact readbacks. I've learned from the controlling workforce about the importance of numbers. Numbers mean things, and in many cases they mean more than one thing. So when you play the game with a pilot and you say, what do those numbers mean to you? Usually they pick the altitude word. But then you say, well, it could be a speed or it could be a heading. Then they always go, well, you didn't tell me. I go, it's no different than when you don't tell the controller. If you read back a number without a qualifier, guess what? He's assuming that you meant what he meant, but he's not privy to the inter-cockpit discussion when the other partner says, no, that wasn't an altitude, that was a heading. That was a heading. So how do we resolve that? Well, we resolve it through a procedure in our flight operations manual which says, if anyone's confused, you get the controller to restate the clearance, and you both listen and come to agreement. Weather avoidance is simple as what you see out the screen, the windscreen and visual conditions, or it's what we see on the radar. When we maneuver around the weather, we look at this green as light precip, the yellow is moderate, and the red is heavy. We see the obvious gaps in the weather where we navigate the airplane even though we can't see anything outside. You get widespread rain events where it's like a low pressure area and you get lots of rain but no vertical development. We will fly through the green. It's not a bad ride. Yellow, the moderate precip as well. But we've learned how, through the training of 20, 30 years of weather avoidance, how to maneuver around this using our weather tools, because our radar has one option that the ATO doesn't have. We can take that antenna and tilt it up and down. We can scan a storm and look for the soft spots, the best places to go. Here's one on an Embraer 190. You got a lot of red here, very little green or yellow. It's a pretty severe storm. Tend to avoid that, obviously. And then when you get several cells, and the option of going left is not possible, then going right is the way you're going to go. And you'll find it by navigating through that green area, staying between the two severe parts of the weather. Not a perfect ride, but not a bad ride either. It's just how we've learned how to use those tools to our advantage. Like I said, what you see out the window is 90% of it. Right turn's easy because you're in the clear, going southbound toward this fix, around that cell. Can you go left? Sure you can. But you're not going to go 15 right. You're going more like 40 left because you want to get downwind as much as you can from that weather system. A little bit closer view of it. And then a picture on the weather radar. You see the lines of light, moderate, precip. And of course, we've picked the obviously clear area to fly around. This was going into Charlotte last summer. This last piece I want to say, and we'll finish up, is talk about wind shear. And let me just show you a wind shear encounter in the simulator. This is not in the real world, so don't panic when you see what happens.
Tower United 15's brass for 26.
United 15 Heavy, Denver Tower. You are clear to land runway 26. We have a low-level wind shear advisory. Previous aircraft reported 15 knot loss on 3 mile 5.
United 15, clear to land 26.
Okay, get some wind shear report loss. I'm going to speed up just a little bit here.
Okay.
And United 15 Heavy winds right now are showing 280 at 32 knots, gusting to 40.
United 15, thank you.
Our throttles have come all the way back here. Got a pretty good pitch going.
Looks like we might be getting a little bit shear. Yeah, might be where that, kind of where they were saying it's maybe a little further out now.
Okay. If we have to go around, it'll be going around flaps 20, possibly climb gear.
Watch yours.
Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear. Wind shear, wind shear,
Descending.
wind shear.
500 descending. 400 descending. 400 descending. 380 descending.
Sink rate, pull up, pull up. Glide slope.
200 descending. 200 level. 210 climbing. 220 climbing. 300 climbing. 400, 500 climbing. United Tower United 15 just had a severe wind shear and we're going around.
United 15 Heavy, Denver Tower, roger. Maintain the runway heading, if you would, please, and maintain 7,000 feet.
Maintain 7,000, United 15. We'll probably go through that little altitude. We'll have to descend back through it.
So there you go. That's a wind shear event. We practice those every year. That's a requirement. It's a precision maneuver that we practice because we need to be good at it. Now, the obvious question years ago was, well, we have a system to show us where the wind shear is. Wouldn't you avoid it? Well, sure you would. And we got that with now predictive wind shear, which is a tool that we use on our airplanes. And then here, United helped me out again with another visual demonstration.
Monitor radar display.
There displays where the potential wind shear is in the weather system. So now I have the option, realistically, of going around and turning away from it at this distance, because it looks at distances from that wind shear encounter. If I fail to make a turn and start a climb, then it will next time it'll give me a warning, not a caution.
Go around. Wind shear ahead.
Now you need to do something, right? And again, it gives you time to start the airplane the vertical so that you're at least moving away from the ground, the energy's pointed in the right way, and you have the greatest probability of getting through the wind shear. Because if you continue on, which in this case you will because you can't turn, you'll run through the reactive system.
Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear.
Which you just saw, okay? In closing, a partnership between us and the company exists when it comes to NextGen. We have invested money, and you have as well, in developing new procedures that will take advantage of the technology that has been developed over the last several years, using 330s in Philadelphia on our international missions, and the fact that we put in new EFBs, electronic flight bags, in our airplanes that utilize and can take advantage of air-to-air, air-to-ground, ground-to-ground SAM, or the ground-to-self-air contained data that comes to us through ADSB. With these new devices in the cockpit, as you see, we'll take advantage of cockpit display traffic information, which can help us in the process of helping to sequence airplanes to the runway, to manage traffic in and out of the NAS from the en route to the terminal world, give us things like surface area movement management systems that we can see traffic around the airport as we taxi out. It helps us with runway incursion issues so we don't inadvertently cross the runway when we shouldn't. All these things are in development right now, and we're participating in that development. CDTI, assisted visual separation, how we can self-separate ourselves with other aircraft in visual conditions using that display that we just showed you. We can link the airplanes together and use that to help us provide our own spacing, which assists the controller. That's part of where NextGen is headed and where we're with it as well, because we've decided, as all the airlines have, that NextGen is a way that provides us the ability to play to the efficiencies of the airplane, make it more efficient for us as an operator, help the environment, help the consumer, and make the whole operation safer. And make no mistake, here in this country, it is the safest airspace to operate in and out of. So in closing up, real brief, just please, and some of you may have already heard it, I say this to every work group that I deal with, do not forget that you are part of that professional group out there, as we all are, in managing, adjusting, and working in the airspace we call the United States and around its borders. Myself and others in the room who fly, Dan and others, you know, we take advantage of that because as professionals we want to. We want a safe operation. But we cannot forget that we come to this job, A, because we earned it, wasn't given to us. We had to spend the time to get as good as we are. We all have a key component of what it takes to make it work right, and we have to be professionals in that regard. So when we come to work, we bring the A game every day because we have to, because all those passengers out there, that's what they expect. And they never get a second thought about what we do with these airplanes, either from a controlling standpoint or from a flying standpoint, because they have a huge amount of trust in our ability. That's a mantle that I'm willing and happy to wear, but with it comes responsibility, and I'm happy to accept that as well. And I know you are as well also. So as we move forward in NextGen, we'll recognize that we'll all have that key component to integrate to make all these things we do in the airspace, operationally, procedurally, regulatory-wise, make it work for everybody. Because in our world, at the end of the day, we still have to make a nickel. We got to make payroll. And as such, you know, that's what we want to do, and do it in a safe manner. So, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your time with me this morning. I hope there was something here that you could take away and use maybe in your job later on. But in any event, I'll entertain any questions at this point. And with that, I thank you.
Any questions for Wes? All right, everybody's ready for lunch, I think. We will have these two presentations available on the web sometime next week. ATOCom's supposed to be producing those, put them on the web, so you'll be able to download them and check them out. So thanks again for everybody coming, and thanks to Wes for coming and sharing this knowledge with us. So thanks again. All right, thanks everybody.